All right, folks, welcome to another installment of Live from the Studio. My name is Jimmy Selesky, and today I'd like to introduce a segment I call Potentially Retarded Takes. And it centers around the social media following of our two major presidential candidates. The sort of narrative surrounding Kamala Harris is that she is kind of bridging the gap for the young voters, the people that were disillusioned with Biden or uninterested in their choices 2 months ago between Trump and Biden, but are now revitalized and invigorated to come out and vote for Kamala. The thought is that all of the hype, all of the clout is on Kamala's side. And this is what you see constantly. And this is something that we have talked about ad nauseum on this show for the past month. That is the campaign. That is the entirety of the campaign. As of right now, we have no distinct policies other than the ones that she seems to have just literally just hand copied from Trump. Like she's for the wall now, no taxes on tips, all the stuff, the tax credit for children. She's just copied. We don't know really of that many policies of Kamala's at the moment, but we do know that she's very, very popular. If you take it back to high school, you'll remember the Student Government Association. You'd vote for class president or whatever, and they'd stand there and they talk about policies, and it's kind of stupid because you're like, what policies could you possibly implement? You're a sophomore in high school. What are you talking about? We have a principal, we have teachers, we have our parents. What are you gonna do? Why are we voting? I mean, I'm glad we're out of class for this, but what are you talking about? But at least they tried to appeal to pretending that they had policies in student government. Kamala Harris's campaign is much more like the prom queen and prom king. They're not talking about policies. The prom queen doesn't talk about policies. That's not what you're voting for when you're voting for the prom queen. The prom queen's talking about, oh my God, she's so popular. She threw a sick party last weekend. I think she made out with Tommy, the star quarterback, but oh my God, she's dating the guy on the basketball team. What's he gonna think? That's the prom queen, baby. That's the prom queen. Everybody wants to sit with the prom queen at lunch. The prom queen doesn't have policies. She's not sitting there talking about what the class colors are gonna be. That's for the freaking nerds. That's for the weird kids. That's for the weird kids. The weird kids talk about policies. The popular kids talk about how popular they are. And everyone else talks about how popular they are. That's what makes them popular, right? We remember high school. We remember middle school. This is simple stuff. So my hypothesis is that if it is the case that Kamala is more popular, then we should observe when we look on social media where she is claimed to be popular, that she should be more popular, right? Is that a crazy idea? Is that a crazy idea? We're going to talk about Instagram here, and I'll explain why in a moment, but first I'm going to explain why we're not talking about Twitter or X. And the reason we're not going to look heavily into Twitter is because while I disagree with this idea, it is heavily argued and pretty much an accepted fact in our American culture that Twitter is a right-wing platform. Now, again, I don't believe that to be the case. I think Twitter is just a neutral platform, and we are so used to censorship and suppression of non-left-wing ideas on our mainstream media, on social media, in our movies and entertainment and our athletics and everything. We're so used to the bombardment of left-wing narrative and the suppression of any right-wing talking points, values, or narratives that when you go onto a neutral site like Twitter and see the quote-unquote right-wing perspective, or really just the not far left-wing perspective represented in any appropriate fashion, it strikes you as right-wing. Whoa, where did all these right-wingers come from? Dude, they've been here the whole time. Twitter isn't a right-wing platform. It's just a platform that isn't left-wing. That's all. That's all. But I'm not even going to get bogged down in making that case because you know what the beauty is? I don't have to. Here's the reality on Twitter. We'll just gloss over it. But Donald Trump has 90 million followers on Twitter. Now, if you recall, Donald Trump was banned from Twitter actually during the time he was still president. The last few months of his presidency, the sitting president of the United States was banned from Twitter. Now, this, of course, is not under Elon's reign. This was done by Jack, the venerable Jack. I don't even know his last name. But that's just a crazy thought in and of itself. If you want any demonstration of how normalized the censorship and suppression of conservative, Republican, right-wing ideas has been in American culture over the past decade especially, is that, you know, not only Alex Jones and Gavin McInnes and Dan Bongino and countless other right-wing figures that have been deplatformed from major things like YouTube and Twitter, social media and all the above, and have been relegated to their own little corners of the internet where they can only talk to their paid subscribers, and that's the only way they can make an income anymore. Yeah, sure. That's seems normal now, even though it's kind of crazy when you think about it, because 15 years ago, it was no thing to watch Alex Jones on YouTube. That's how a free society used to work. But of course, he was wrong about Sandy Hook, and now we're never allowed to hear from him again on YouTube. Okay, but the president? This man was voted legally in 2016 to be the leader of the free world. And he is currently serving as the president of the United States. And he's banned from Twitter. And not nearly enough people saw that as odd. Not nearly enough people saw that. It was weird. Moving past that, but just noting that Donald Trump has been off of Twitter. I think he just got back on Twitter a couple weeks ago after he did that Spaces thing, or maybe right before he did that Spaces thing with Elon. He was off of Instagram for a substantial amount of time too. I'm not sure how long, but I do know it was definitely a thing when he got back on Instagram. I think it was probably a couple months ago. But now he's back on Twitter. For the first time since late 2020, early 2021, sometime around there. But he has 90 million followers. Kamala Harris has 20.9 million followers. 20.9. That's more than 4 times less than Donald Trump. Donald Trump has more than 4 times the Twitter followers than Kamala Harris. Joe Biden, 38.5 million. Donald Trump has more than double Joe Biden's Twitter followers. Now remember, Joe Biden is the most popular presidential candidate in history. He received 81 trillion votes. Actually, look it up. 81 quadrillion votes in the 2020 election. Making him, again, the most popular candidate ever. Donald Trump, in the 2020 election, scored a measly 80 million something votes, making him only the second most popular presidential candidate in history that same year. AKA a fringe candidate fueled by extremists. Not half the voting population, just crazy far-right extremists. But yeah, the most popular presidential candidate in history has less than half of Donald Trump's Twitter followers on this website. Now, again, the argument here is, of course, going to be that Twitter is a right-wing platform. Therefore, of course, a far-right figure like Donald Trump is going to have more followers than the moderate, Democrat, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris okay, I disagree with you, but sure, I will allow your premise, and let's move on to Instagram. Now, surely, Instagram is not a right-wing platform, correct? Surely it's not. It's owned by Meta, which is Facebook. Now, Facebook is also not a right-wing platform. We may get into it later today. A letter from Mark Zuckerberg himself, the founder of Facebook and the CEO of Meta, basically acknowledging, not basically, just blatantly acknowledging that the Biden administration in 2021 actively and repeatedly pressured him to remove certain things from his platforms. Not only about COVID misinformation. You may recall you could not post in early 2020 that the coronavirus started in a laboratory. If you posted that or posted memes about that or in any way alluded to that, your post would be removed for violating some type of whatever guidelines, misinformation or whatever, and your account could be suspended temporarily or permanently. I don't know, depending on how egregious your violation was. But that's just one singular example as it pertained to COVID misinformation. Now, of course, we know that the lab leak theory is the most obvious duh in the world, that the Wuhan coronavirus leaked to the world from the Wuhan coronavirus lab in Wuhan, and not a bowl of bat soup coincidentally across the street. Obviously, this was the case, but you couldn't say that on social media in 2020. You couldn't. You could not say the truth. And we, of course, saw with the vaccine and things pertaining to that, death counts, everything. And that was just COVID. But it's not just COVID. It was everything. He admitted to the Hunter Biden laptop story from the New York Post and being pressured to take that down, even though that was obviously a true story. But instead it was labeled as Russian disinformation. People who shared that story violated guidelines. The New York Post was suspended from Twitter until they personally deleted the article themselves, which is a weird power flex. Like, go up to your room and think about what you've done. And when you're ready to apologize, we'll let you, back on Twitter. Like, but you have to delete it yourself to basically, it was like very 1984 Orwellian, like we have to cure you. So you have to delete it. We're not going to delete it for you. Like that level of censorship where I will say it really shone its head through in 2020 and 2021 particularly. In any case, Facebook and Instagram are by no means right-wing platforms, okay? So let's just get that out of the way. I would argue that they are, because of all the things we just discussed, more left-leaning. They seem much more prone to censor right-wing, quote-unquote, misinformation than they are to censoring left-wing, quote-unquote, misinformation. I can't recall the last time a left-wing conspiracy theory was actively and concertedly pulled from the internet. I can't actually think of that. I can think of plenty of right-wing theories and stories that have been pulled and censored and suppressed. But regardless, whatever, Facebook and Instagram are not right-wing platforms. So if we go on Instagram, then certainly we should observe, in my opinion, that Kamala Harris is killing Trump, as we say she is, among the youth voters. Among social media, pop culture, the meme gods, the hype beasts, she should be shredding Donald Trump. This is her demographic. Okay, sure. Donald Trump's probably killing it on some Facebook group somewhere where our parents, who are all boomers, they like Trump. But us kids, hi, fellow kids. Obviously, we're riding with Kamala, baby. Kamala's got, how many followers Kamala got? How many followers does Kamala got? 17.8 million? 17.8 million? Damn. Trump, what do you got to say about that? 26.3 million. Donald Trump has 8.5 million more followers than Kamala Harris on Instagram? He has 50% more followers on Instagram? The non-right-leaning, youth-leaning platform? Kamala's bread and butter? Her wheelhouse? The K-Hive lives here? Well, how many does Tim Walz, America's dad, have? Tim Walz, I'm sure he's popping off. He is all the rage. Everybody loves Tim Walz. 1.6 million. Okay, so you're telling me that Donald Trump has almost 7 million more followers than the entire Harris Walz ticket? Kamala and Tim Walz combined have 19.4 million Instagram followers. Donald Trump alone has 26.3 million. I'm not even going to bring up JD Vance. Who cares? We don't need JD Vance for this one. What about Uncle Joe? Most popular president in presidential history, Joe Biden. Surely the man who received 81 sextillion votes. More votes than were theorized that could even exist in the universe prior to the 2020 election. Surely this man is hitting Donald Trump's follower count out the park. You think you got clout, Donald? You think you know what you don't even know what clout is, Donnie boy? It's Dark Brandon. Everybody follows Dark Brandon. Well, how many Instagram followers does Dark Brandon have? 17.3 million. That must be a typo or something. 17.3 million? Do they mean to put a B there? 17.3 billion? Every person on planet Earth follows him twice, right? 17.3 billion? That would make more sense to me. But you're telling me that Donald Trump has 9 million more followers on Instagram than Joe Biden? But I thought all of the Trump voters were like the weird kids, like that, they're not like all the young voters are like, all about the Democrats and they're all about Kamala and they're all about, Tim Walz. And Joe Biden is like, he was the most perfect, competent president of all time and everybody loved him and everybody was so invigorated by his campaign. This doesn't make sense. This doesn't add up. And here's the point, guys. This isn't just like an anomaly, because I understand the argument here as to why that's not necessarily demonstrative of their actual voter appeal. But I also hope that you can understand my argument as to why it's got to be a little bit demonstrative, right? Like, we all accept on some level in a society that a person's follower count on social media is highly correlated to their popularity, right? Right? I think that's a safe statement. We live in a clout-based currency society where followers are everything. It's how you prove how famous you are when you're trying to book a show somewhere or get a job or whatever. Like, followers mean a lot. People pay for followers. Bots that get, and we'll get into that in a moment, because that's some of the, things that I've heard to contest my theory. But in the meantime, let's just acknowledge that follower count is not nothing when you're trying to gauge popularity. If you're trying to gauge who's the better candidate, follower count means nothing. Just because a band has more followers than another band doesn't mean that they're a better band. Just because a stand-up comedian has more followers than another stand-up comedian doesn't mean that he's funnier. So it's not a gauge of quality, but it is certainly a gauge of popularity. That's literally what it measures. Literally. So when we're talking about popularity among candidates, and if the claim is that the Kamala Harris campaign is like shattering records in its ability to appeal to the youth vote and social media pop culture, hype culture, celebrity culture, all the things that exist online where predominantly younger people are more literate and active, then you should see this in the metrics. The best metric of which being follower count and engagement. And that's not what you see. Even beyond just their follower counts on their pages, when you go onto other quote unquote neutral territory, when you go onto other popular Instagram pages, meme accounts, content creators like WorldStar, Barstool Sports, Friday Beers, very popular, very engaged social media accounts, and pretty much every comment section in the world, you're going to see a "we're voting for Trump" button, or "we're not voting for Kamala" button, or something like that. And as much as that's really just supposed to be like shit talking, it's actually a fairly decent metric, conveniently placed in every comment thread on Instagram, where you can see how many people are tapping that Trump 2024 button, or use this as a fuck Biden button, or it gives you a pretty good visual of the millions of people that are passing through this post. It's not nothing. In fact, I would say it's far more than nothing. I would say it's actually, as is the point of this video, a better metric of what the general public is actually feeling about this election than, let's say, I don't know, what they're trying to make you believe on the news and in mainstream media as a whole. These numbers are right in front of your face. That's why I was inspired to do this video. They are right there. Do not believe your lying eyes, but do believe your lying eyes, because they're not lying. These are objective numbers of objective engagement that give you a pretty good litmus test of the general sentiments in the country. So just even looking at the eyeball test, but let's actually delve into real hardline numbers, because that's where the real meat and potatoes of this discussion is going to happen. Nobody wants to just watch a video of some guy they never heard of, aka me, talk about how it looks. We need some numbers. Well, luckily you've come to the right place, because I'm just autistic enough to do that for you. So what I've decided to do is develop an actual experiment. Not anything too crazy involved, but we're going to definitely dig into some numbers to see what's actually going on here. And in order to conduct this experiment, we have to agree on a couple parameters. And bear with me, this is going to be controversial. We're going to use social media engagement as a metric of how much appeal these two candidates have among people that use social media. Do you need me to repeat that? We're going to use social media engagement to measure how well these two candidates are engaging with people on social media. I know. See, I think what we're supposed to do is just trust that one candidate or the other is dominating on social media. But wait a second, you're telling me we're actually going to look at the numbers and see what's actually going on? Who are you to do that? I'm just a guy with an Instagram page and the ability to do some math. So let's do it. But first, we have to agree on the social media platform we're going to look into, because there's plenty of social media platforms. We've been using Instagram thus far, and I guess at this point, I'd like to explain further and kind of steelman exactly why we're going to stick with Instagram for this particular experiment. Facebook is, by the numbers, the most popular social media platform in the United States and the world, with 222 million users in the United States. Instagram comes in second with 181 million active users in the country. That's a pretty distant, far off second place. However, 61.1% of Instagram users in America fall between the ages 18 to 34. 61.1%, that's almost 2/3 of Instagram users are between 18 to 34 years old. The people who use Facebook as their primary social media platform tends to skew a little older. I would say millennials and up. In particular, probably older millennials and up, being people that are in their mid-30s and on, I would say. TikTok has significantly less active users in the United States than Instagram, about 140 million. It skews way too young in order to measure. I would say that it's probably the most popular platform among 13 to 17-year-olds, high school, middle school, and younger. They can't vote. A 13-year-old can't vote. So all the middle schoolers and high schoolers on TikTok that may be boosting Kamala/Trump's popularity, it doesn't matter. That's not going to tell us anything about the voter sentiments in this country. We're concerned with 18 and older. That, to me, says everything that needs to be said about why we're sticking with Instagram. It is the most popular social media platform among this 18 to 34-year-old demographic that is not right-leaning by any stretch of the imagination. It's the best possible platform to conduct this experiment. So what I figured would be a fair metric on these two candidates' social media popularity would be to go to their respective Instagram pages and actually tabulate the amount of likes per post they're getting over time. There's two things in there: likes per post and over time. Those are both important. Likes per post and not simply total likes. First of all, likes. Likes, in my opinion, is the best possible metric if you're looking for supporters, because comments could be negative. You might comment on a post that you hate. You might comment on a post that you love. However, a like is pretty obviously a positive engagement. How often do you like a post on Instagram that pisses you off? You might comment on it, but you're generally only going to like posts that you like. So the amount of likes specifically that each candidate is getting on these posts is the best metric. Per post, why? Why not just total likes? Well, because you can only like a post once. If Trump posts 3 times a day and Kamala only posts, let's say, twice a day, then one supporter could like all 3 of Trump's posts, and that would be 3 likes for Trump, whereas one supporter for Kamala would like her 2 posts, but that's only 2 likes for Kamala. However, in both scenarios, that's just one supporter. So total likes is not going to tell us their reach. What you want is likes per post, because again, you can only like a post once on Instagram. You can't like it twice. So 1 supporter equals 1 like per post. Now we're going to be focusing on the time period since Kamala announced her campaign on Sunday, July 21st, because that is what would appear to be most relevant. We don't really care too much about Kamala's social media appeal prior to that. But we don't just want to look at the total average over that 6-week period until now. We want to look at how that has fared over time. And so what I've decided to do is look at their average likes per post per week, or weekly likes per post. So for each week, how many likes per post is each candidate getting on Instagram? And that brings us to our chart. Now, I've included the week prior because I do think it is relevant on some level. Not necessarily relevant, but just a nice little factoid that prior to that announcement on Sunday, July 21st, Kamala, I think, obviously was averaging far less engagement on social media, significantly less. And that week prior is also significant for Trump because if you recall, even though it's ancient history at this point, Trump was shot on July 13th. The assassination attempt on Trump occurred just over a week prior to Kamala's campaign endorsement. Now, obviously, you see that week right after the assassination attempt was a peak week for Trump in terms of social media engagement, but we're really going to focus mainly on that first week of her announcement, which is that gigantic blue spike you're looking at right here. So the week of Kamala's announcement, where we'll begin this analysis, you can see that she is averaging significantly more likes per post than Donald Trump. Donald Trump's sitting somewhere around 430,000. Kamala's sitting around 575,000. So significantly more. Now, that tells us something, but not a lot. That's obviously a peak week for her, as you can see. It's the beginning, the launch of her campaign. That is where everything is put out there to the public. That is her initial push. So we should expect that that week, at the very least, is going to be her biggest week. And it also shouldn't come as a surprise that she is putting up significantly more numbers than Trump for that initial week. And of course, that's what we see. But what you notice is immediately following, just 2 weeks in, you see that they're literally sitting at the same level. Pretty much the exact same amount of engagement on social media for Trump and Kamala just 2 weeks in to her campaign. Going into week 3, you see Kamala pull out ahead again. This is August 4th through August 10th. This is the week where she announces Tim Walz as her running mate. So you're going to expect that fresh news coming out of the Kamala campaign is going to amount to a little bit of a pop for her on social media. Not a big news week for Trump at all, so you expect to see him coasting around the same level as he was the week prior. However, going into week 4 and on, you're seeing that Trump is actually ahead of Kamala in terms of social media engagement. It's not by leaps and bounds. It's very tight, but he is in the lead. And the reason why that matters more than maybe this chart is showing is because this, again, is supposedly Kamala's wheelhouse. All of the parameters set in this experiment should, in theory, favor Kamala heavily. Again, this is a social media platform whose usership is predominantly the 18 to 34-year-old age bracket, the younger voters, where apparently Kamala has the most pull. Based off of what we see here, where Kamala's wheelhouse platform, she is still behind Trump as of late in terms of social media engagement, should tell us that if we were to go onto Facebook or another platform that doesn't skew heavily young, that doesn't skew heavily towards her base, that Trump would be even further out ahead. So that's the real takeaway here. It's not just that Trump is performing better on Instagram than Kamala. It's that this is the one platform that you should expect Kamala to be performing better than Trump, which means that if she's not even performing as well as Trump on her wheelhouse platform, how is she doing among the voter base as a whole? This is the myth that we are centering in on. And this is the concept that I want to leave you with today. That once again, as we've discussed several times on this channel, it has been my opinion and the opinion of many people that the entire Kamala campaign movement, this hype, this celebrity culture, this pop culture behind her, has sort of created a facade of support and enthusiasm. What we call astroturfing, the opposite of grassroots. Grassroots being an organic base, an organic flow of support, whereas astroturfing is fake grass. It is fake organic support. It is fake enthusiasm. We are being told on a daily basis that the polls are very tight among voters as a whole, that the enthusiasm for Kamala is spiking, that she has really changed up this race in a big way, that Trump's going to have a much tougher time, that all the swing states have changed over, that all these new voters have come into the fold. That is the narrative that I think we can all agree we have been exposed to for the past couple months. That is the narrative. However, when we look at the actual numbers, when we look at the actual amount of engagement these two candidates have, particularly in the base, in the demographic that is supposedly heavily skewed for Kamala, what we see is that Trump still has an edge. Now, there are obviously very many arguments to the contrary as to why this isn't the perfect metric on their true appeal. I've heard people argue that, Trump uses bots or whatever. I agree that there's bots on Instagram. I agree that that exists. As long as we can allow that this type of engagement, this bot engagement, exists for both candidates, and we're not going to sit here and just argue the point that it exists way more heavily for Trump than it does for Kamala on Instagram, which is by no means a right-leaning platform, I'm going to propose that this analysis, this trend, this measurement is a fair measurement. And it tells a story that I think we can all intuitively feel, which is that over the past couple weeks, Kamala seems to have lost some steam. There's the initial effect, there's the initial pop, there's initial excitement, which, again, as we've discussed several times on this show, is not really about excitement for Kamala. It's about excitement that Biden dropped out. That is primarily what we observed. She did not have nearly the amount of public support and reach and appeal before it was handed to her. There was a pop. We all kind of allowed ourselves to get gaslit a little bit into this idea that suddenly Kamala is this unbelievably popular candidate. But over the past couple weeks, I don't know, that's all worn off. And you can see that Trump's engagement is fairly consistent. There's a downward trend for him as well. However, he's also coming off of an assassination attempt where you'd expect a massive pop for him. But when you look at the metrics over the past few weeks, you see that he's pretty steadily in a certain range. There hasn't been a lot of major news for either candidate in the past few weeks, so you would expect engagement for both candidates to drop off. What you're seeing is that the drop off for Kamala is far more dramatic than the drop off for Trump. This is why the eyeball test or the general vibes that you get from things are not to be completely discounted. The sentiment that I feel, that I believe many Americans feel, whether they are conscious of it or not, is that the hype for Kamala never seemed all that authentic, that her popularity in the initial phase of her campaign in July seemed to be very obviously a massive pop that was unsustainable. And it appears to have fallen off dramatically as she's been more and more scrutinized, forced to engage in actual questions and answers, although it may be on a very friendly news outlet such as CNN with Tim Walz, where it's pre-recorded and segmented and edited. So we still, at this point, have not gotten to see a real interview with Kamala Harris more than 6 weeks into her campaign, as those criticisms have begun to mount and sort of take the forefront over this hype and party vibe, joy, campaign that they've been able to run for the past month and a half. Her enthusiasm has dropped off because even the most fervent supporters of Kamala are starting to want to see something more out of her than just, hey, look, it's me, Kamala. Remember me? I'm not Trump. That can get you pretty far, as we saw in the 2020 election, being not Trump. But at a certain point, I would hope you would expect a little bit more out of your candidate. Is this take retarded? You tell me. That's why we do this here. You tell me. If you think that Kamala is rising and Trump is falling, then at a certain point, you're going to have to prove it. So, by all means, my name is Jimmy Selesky. This is Live from the Studio. Till next time, peace.